This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. Today, we are very excited that the Prodigy Season 2 trailer is out, the key art is out, so we got co-executive producer Aaron Waltke to come and talk to us about all things Prodigy. So let's get right to it.
All right, I'd like to welcome once again for his third time on the pod. Is it 3 times, Laurie?
This will be the third.
Aaron Waltke, for Season 2 of Star Trek Prodigy, you were the co-executive producer?
That's right, yes. The first season I was a co-producer and writer, and the second season I was promoted to co-executive producer and co-head writer, what they call a story editor in animation terms. But it means something totally different in live action, so I usually just say co-head writer.
I mean, take us a little bit, like what was a day like for Aaron Waltke back in 2021 when you were writing Season 2?
So, I mean, Season 2 was interesting because, just to give you a sense of sort of time frame perspective, for Season 1, we turned in, I think, the first draft of the finale, and then a week later, COVID hit, and everything shut down. Oof. And so, Season 2, when that started ramping up for the writer's room, we were still very much kind of in, at least initially, we were in that sort of pandemic mode where I don't think the offices even had fully opened up yet until after the Season 2 writer's room wrapped. So it was all over Zoom in this particular case, but to be honest, like the process wasn't that much different than doing it in person. The only difference is because everybody's on a little Zoom screen, you feel a little bit like a teacher where you have to call on people to be funny or to be interesting or have something profound to say. But yeah, I mean, it really just depends on what part of the process you're talking about. Like if it's the first few weeks, we usually have sort of a blue sky period where we kind of assess where the series is as a whole, what our goals are, what by that time we had probably, kind of pitched to the network, what our big ideas for how Season 2 would be structured would be, and kind of the big picture ideas. I think the Hagemans have said repeatedly, like, the first season, they kind of stole a ship, quote unquote. And then this season, we want to see them earn a ship. And so obviously Season 1 was very much about sort of wish fulfillment. Some young people find a ship buried in a cave and sort of get to go on this grand adventure, only to realize that, there's no such thing as a free starship. And everything, in fact, has consequences to it. Whereas I feel like that's kind of writ large here in Season 2, because they're no longer kind of necessarily masters of their own fate anymore. They're now small parts in the big machine that is Starfleet. And, we kind of wanted to explore that aspect of Star Trek that we only saw little bits and glimpses of in Season 1, whereas some of these characters that we've come to know and love, especially like Rock Talk, who is obviously science oriented and is sort of thriving in this sort of structured environment, really jump right into Starfleet, and it's like it's where they always belonged. But there are other personalities like Dal, who obviously have always struggled somewhat with authority given their difficult upbringing. And, even though I think those trust issues are mending, something we talked about very early on in the writer's room of Season 2 specifically was, how do we kind of show that there are many ways to kind of find your place in the world. And, maybe not every character is that perfect academic straight A student. And there are different types of learning and different ways of finding your calling. And I think that was especially important for Dal. And these are the sorts of conversations we had in those early days, just trying to decide, like, what are our character arcs? How does it fit into the grander sort of plot arc and a lot of those sort of unresolved narrative threads? And then each, once we kind of hammered that out, then we would sort of examine the episodes individually and, what's the fun high concept Star Trek episode of the week type premise, and how do we layer in those sort of seasonal character arcs or thematic arcs for the show as a whole. and just to have fun and play, and then just keep hammering it out, and everybody playing at the top of their intelligence. And that's why I love working in a writer's room, is because that's all I get to do all day.
As you were planning out season 2, was there anything in the reaction that you got to season 1 that you thought you should that guided any of your decisions?
Well, I mean, obviously there was a pretty visceral reaction, I think, to when people first saw season 1, because we intentionally set it so far outside of Federation space and away from anything recognizable as Starfleet that initially some people were like, well, where's the Star Trek of it all? And then as the season went on, they started to piece together that we had deconstructed all of those sort of core elements and started piecing them back together, both in a very technical sense of how does a transporter work, but also in the grander sense of just there is a better future for us out there based on exploration and understanding our better selves by going out and meeting people different from ourselves. So now season 2, I think, will probably not suffer necessarily from that particular question that audiences will have, because it starts very much in the heart of Starfleet. And in many ways, that is sort of one of the challenges that I think our young crew is going to have to engage with, is now that they've sort of gotten their quote unquote happily ever after, how do they actually make the best of this opportunity they've been given? There are other things too that not necessarily in reaction to the audience's appreciation of season 1, but just by the very nature of how the show has been made. There are places we get to explore without having to establish how the characters know this, that, or whatever. There's now a time gap where they can kind of catch up with the rest of the universe, and we can just have fun playing Star Trek and telling Star Trek stories. I should say there is still very much a curiosity and a wonder built in that I think all great Star Trek, even with these so-called seasoned officers aboard a starship, always take a moment to appreciate that they've encountered some scientific anomaly or alien race or in some cases a time paradox that even is beyond their current comprehension. And then part of the excitement is how do we unpack that and untangle that Gordian knot and learn something new about the universe in doing so.
Would you say that this more Star Trek-y season, is that the biggest difference, or are there other structural differences, more or less episodic, or other big differences with season 2?
Yeah, I would say there are some big differences in season 2. I think tone-wise, it is a little bit more mature. The kids are growing up into proper young adults, and they're being given responsibilities, and the stakes for themselves, are obviously high, because this is the chance that they've given themselves. And if they screw it up or they feel like they don't belong, then what is there for them left for them? And then obviously with the tasks and the sort of scientific anomalies or questions or paradoxes or whatever they face in the season, I think that the stakes also get a little bit higher, because they're no longer just looking out for themselves, but now that there's a bigger story at play that they're only sort of day players in, and if they're careful, they might become the main characters in the worst possible way. And so structurally, I think it is also a little bit different, because knowing that going into season 2, what worked, what didn't, how can we play with pacing? We tried to take full advantage of the fact that this is a streaming show, and if a story needs extra space to be told, we shouldn't be afraid of that. And so I think in this season, somebody told me that it has a record number of two-parters. I don't know if that's true. Deep Space Nine had a lot of two-parters in a season, but we do have a lot more two-parters in this season, because sometimes there was a story that we were telling that we felt wouldn't be serviced well if it was just crammed into 21.5 minutes.
Are these literal two-parters where it's clear it's part 1, part 2, or because season 1 had a few episodes that weren't called two-parters but still felt like two-parters?
Yeah.
In this case, we were much more honest and just said part 1, part 2. So off the top of my head, I think we have 5. We have 5 two-parters in a 20-episode season.
No, that is a lot.
And it is like the structure is pretty interesting because, I feel like in season 1, the structure was very much like we have our little, our mini arc of we have to get away from the Diviner, right? And then find Starfleet. And then the second half of season 1, it was like, oh, if we get there, it'll destroy Starfleet. Whereas season 2, it's a little bit more parabolic almost, where, we went into this knowing, like, for sure that, okay, this is going to be one story that is going to have elements set up in the first few episodes that will come back in the second half. But then in the middle, they're going to have to go very far afield, similar to, almost like the Odyssey, where in order to get their ultimate goal, they're going to have to venture very far out into the unknown and encounter challenges that they never would have foreseen. And then by the end, they kind of return with that newfound knowledge and are able to kind of synthesize it all into one massive sort of epic wrap up. So, yeah, I mean, if I feel like I'm starting to get into really nerdy, like story shape discussion stuff, but it
You're
is
in
very
the right
interesting.
Place. Yeah. Well, so when you wrote the season, you guys thought it was still going to be on Paramount Plus and dropping every week. So, like, how do you feel like it's going to affect the story when it's on Netflix and all of a sudden 20 episodes are hitting at once?
Well, I can say actually that even on Paramount Plus, we were anticipating that they were going to change up the release structure, because that's something kind of interesting about animated shows in particular, but also just viewing habits of younger people. Is, as much as I love the week-to-week anticipation and theorizing, like, believe me, that's my absolute happy place. Young people, they tend to binge watch in large chunks. That's how they absorb, and then they'll sort of create sort of a fandom around that, and they'll continue the conversation going just by, theorizing between the next season and creating headcanons and fan fictions and all that. Anecdotally, I had a friend who had a young daughter, like 7 or 8, come over, and I showed them an episode of television that my wife had written. It was what they call a bridge show, like young adult, not young adult, but like somewhere between children's animation. But anyway, so she sat down and watched one episode and then proceeded to watch the entire season in one sitting. And that was after we kept saying, like, hey, you want to go outside and play? And she was like, no. And I think a lot of that comes down to, if you ask any young person now, like, what kind of television they watch, hopefully you'll get an answer of some kind, because many of them don't watch television at all. But the ones that do watch television, it's very much formed in the age of like YouTube viewing or animes, where you'll get the entire anime season imported from Japan, and then you'll binge watch the whole thing, and then you'll go talk about it with your friends holistically. In terms of our second season specifically, we actually, just by the very nature of what I described earlier, that we did kind of allow the stories to breathe. I think it's actually very bingeable and might actually be enjoyed more that way. Because you can watch a lot of these two-parters as a whole, as they were intended when we wrote them. And you can stop at any time, take a break, and come back the next day. But I think that we had so many moving pieces in this season that all are sometimes setting up things that don't pay off for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 episodes later, that in a way, I think it actually might make for a better experience to be able to just enjoy the ride, and then you can go back and kind of see what you missed.
But you still considered it as 2 10-episode chunks. I mean, you didn't expect them to drop all 20 at once on Paramount Plus.
Well, it was discussed. But ultimately, we kind of let the story dictate where those rises and falls are, those sort of mid-season finales, as they call them, or those Well of Lost Souls or Moment of Last Resorts. Like, the stories kind of all follow the same mathematical shape. And so knowing that we had 20 episodes, that really is what kind of defined it. And so naturally at 20, we're like, okay, where are we at 10? Where are we at 5? And in that way, it doesn't. Hopefully, it won't feel like it's dragging out too long, because we are kind of taking each unit of 5 or 6 episodes as sort of like a movement in the story. And then as the show goes on, you'll see that the next movement kind of has a sea change in the status quo and a new mini goal, while still trying to achieve their ultimate goal of the rescue mission that Admiral Janeway was on to find Chakotay.
But if you had your choice of how people could watch it, and if you could say, like, watch these and then these and like, what would you tell people? Do it weekly or do it 5 at a time? Like, what would be your ideal?
I mean, I don't like telling people how they should enjoy art, but my personal preference would probably be like, watch a few episodes at a time. Yeah. And then I think that personally, like, I found even with season 1, watching 5 episodes in a row over the course of a day or two, really, you can appreciate it a little bit more of like where the characters were going and what happens in those arcs. So, I maybe just keep in mind that there are mini arcs throughout every 5 or 6 episodes, and do with that information what you will.
So we're speaking hours after they released a trailer and a new synopsis. Would you say that the trailer and the synopsis are describing the season, the 20-episode season, or the first big arc of the 20-episode season?
Well, as I said, like the story of season 2 is a lot more holistic across the 20 episodes. Season 1, I think, was broken up into 2 very distinct kind of story movements, just because of the mystery involved of like, where did this ship come from, and how do we get away from the Diviner? And then the second half of season 1 was very much, okay, now we know where the ship came from, but how do we prevent it from destroying Starfleet? And in the meantime, Admiral Janeway is pursuing us, thinking we are the ones who kidnapped Chakotay and stole the Protostar. So season 2, I think it's a lot more holistic in that there are storylines that very organically sort of complicate and evolve in such a way that the new sort of sub goals that our characters are trying to achieve in achieving this mission take precedence in a very clean and clear way. And so it would be weird for them to suddenly go back to the original one before resolving the more immediate threats that sort of unfold as they undergo this classified mission with Admiral Janeway to investigate the temporal anomaly that was created by the Protostar exploding at the end of season 1. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen season 1.
We've got a couple questions that are almost like clarifying perhaps things that we saw in the trailer or in the press release. We see a lot of Gwyn. She's in Starfleet uniform. Like, we saw her, you just mentioned the end of season 1. She's on her own path, but it seems like she gets back with the gang pretty quickly, or?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say that we would not keep Gwyn away from the crew for an entire season. I think at a certain point you'd be like, why am I watching a soap opera on Solum? Right. and quite frankly, in a 22-minute format, that's a dangerous game to play for too long, because if you only have 10 minutes with each storyline, at a certain point, it starts to feel like you're not servicing either. So, there's a very organic ways where, as you see in the trailer, the crew is brought back together, but they have new sort of issues that they have to contend with.
The press release that we got mentioned the Diviner and Dreadnought. Are they a big part of the season?
I mean, they're certainly in it. That's what the press release says.
That wasn't my question.
Well, I guess, one of
I think they play an important role. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Because it was almost written from a first season point of view, because it mentions that Mulgrew is playing hologram Janeway and Jamila Jamil is playing Essentia. These are all things that by the end of the first season have changed, Isn't
that interesting?
But then it mentions a time paradox, and so I'm thinking that may explain why maybe these characters are still around in some way.
Well, yes and no. But if you remember at the end of season 1, as Gwyn is departing for Solum, she does mention that due to the nature of time travel, the original diviner is, or her father, or a young version of him, is still out there on Solum.
Right.
So, that's not new information.
And Essentia would be there too, because she said that they were working on this project together.
Right. And also,
But
if
wasn't
you recall,
she the Vindicator? But she wasn't Essentia. She was
Right.
the Vindicator.
Yeah.
yeah, and if you recall, like the slightly older Vindicator who caused so much trouble in the back of season 1 escaped, so she's still out there somewhere as well.
Right.
It sounds like it mentions time travel in the press release, in the trailer. We know Janeway hates time travel.
Yes.
So, but is it like, it seems like that's the big sci-fi concept behind the season, is the implications of the season 1 finale and how it caused this time paradox.
Right. So if you think that we only talk about time paradoxes in this season, you would be very mistaken. I'm trying to figure out how to say this without sounding like too grandiose, but we actually strove to do the impossible and create a grand unifying theory of how the Star Trek multiverse works. and we explore that pretty thoroughly in surprising ways in this season.
That's awesome.
Now because I love time travel in Star Trek, but I'm also the first to acknowledge that Star Trek uses different rules depending on who's writing.
Yes.
Time travel. There's the Back to the Future rules, and there's there's all sorts of different rules. The Terminator rules, whatever, and no one seems to agree. Are you saying that you're going to make that make sense?
I figured it out, Marty. Here's what I will say is, like, I think even Star Trek occasionally leans into that element of, like, there's seeming contradictions and the rules feel sort of like esoteric and not quite figured out yet. And I think that's okay. Even in science, I think that's okay for there to be elements that are still unknown. Like, even in our current understanding of the universe, like there's matter, antimatter, asymmetry. Like, if there's an equal amount of matter and antimatter in the universe, then why do we exist? Why is there more matter than antimatter? We have no idea. And I think that Star Trek kind of embraces that, especially with the thorny, hard sci-fi stuff like Bootstrap's paradox or time travel paradoxes, or even how that works. I think we got kind of a glimpse, though, of how that works, especially in Enterprise with Agent Daniels. I showed the writer's room several times, and they were like, "Oh my God, my brain is melting." It's like where I showed them that famous scene where Daniels, like, kind of comes clean and brings Archer into the room and says, "Here's how you think time travel works, but actually it's like this." And there's just a wall of, like, floating, flying timelines, and we've seen caught little glimpses of it, even how the temporal wars, for instance, work. The only way that makes sense is if there are other timelines and other multiverse universes out there that are trying to invade this other one and conquer it. And that's reinforced in Star Trek The Next Generation when you have parallels where they quite explicitly say there are various quantum timeline realities for every micro adjustment or question that you have. It's a many worlds theory writ large. This is not me making stuff up. It's all there in Star Trek. But I think that why one thing happens versus the other, I think that's where there's room for discovery. And I think that's where the simple Terminator rules or the simple Back to the Future rules are like, well, that happened because of this particular set of circumstances. But I think it's okay for humanity to say, even in the 24th century, we don't have it all figured out yet, because you have characters like even the early episodes with the Traveler. If you remember when the Traveler first showed up to, hang out with Wesley or what have you, that, like, they're like, so are you from the future? Are you from another timeline? And then he's like laying down and he just says, like, yes, I guess that's how you would understand it. So it's very, it's an open playing field, but I think there's also an internal logic, although complicated, makes sense. And we try to do that in a show that will also ostensibly be understood by young people.
Right. I was just watching a Voyager episode where they were saying, well, sometimes the effect happens before the cause.
Yes.
And you're like, what? Okay. Like, you just have to kind of okay it.
Yeah, and sometimes Star Trek gets away with that with technobabble or like Fermat's last theorem, that whole business where they were like, no one solved Fermat's last theorem, and then somebody actually solved it in our timeline, and then they had to add a line later in a later episode. We were like, someone thought that they had solved it in 1996, but he was wrong.
So the trailer's been out all day and everybody's going nuts talking about it. I know you're always online and checking to see what everybody thinks.
Yes.
So is there anything that nobody said anything about yet that you think they will be later that's in the trailer?
People have said some things about elements of the trailer that they haven't totally made the connection yet, which I'm actually kind of excited that the reveal could still happen. You know, I think some people have rightly identified there is in fact a Vulcan that has joined kind of like our cast here, as is also mentioned in the press release, brilliantly played by Michaela Dietz, named Majel, named as a sort of homage to the great Majel Barrett. Roddenberry. She's wonderful. It was really great to kind of just as T'Lyn was a great sort of countermeasure to the wackadoo adventures of the the Cerritos. I think Majel is an excellent sort of foil in a way to some of the more outrageous impulses of some of our crew. But at the same time, even she has sort of like a story to tell and sort of a growth to undergo about her assumptions about these sort of illogical crewmates. And there's a very interesting sort of relationship that she develops with the crew, especially with one of the crew members who I'm excited for people to see.
I believe at some point Murph talks. Is that correct?
He does say pew, pew, pew in the trailer.
Right. So, you know, no man is an island and no melanoid slime worm stays the same forever. Murph is growing up just the same as everyone else. And we're kind of getting to see these stages, these developmental stages in real time. I think one thing that was kind of fun about Murph in the first season is he was sort of just a chaos agent and no one really knew what he was thinking or doing at any one time. And I think what was kind of fun for this season is that, you know, Murph, even if his language is still, his ability to speak our language is difficult, you know, that doesn't preclude Star Trek from learning how to interact and interpret him. And so that plays a significant part of the show, especially the first half of this season.
You talked about the season having maybe a more serious tone, but then you also brought in Robert Picardo to play the Doctor.
Yes.
And he, in San Francisco, I saw him talking about how you guys really got him and understood his style, including his humor. Yeah, but also he could be serious. Like, so what was the impetus to bring in, you know, because you could have brought in anyone or no one. Why bring in Picardo? Why bring back the Doctor?
Well, there's twofold reasons, one story reason and one terribly selfish reason. The story reason is that we realized that with the absence of hologram Janeway and with Admiral Janeway now sort of crewing up a mission to save her number one, it made perfect sense for her to bring in, like, for her bridge crew, like people that she trusted the most for what she considered to be a very covert and classified mission. On top of that, character-wise, we felt like the Doctor would be a very interesting sort of like new voice or character that would fill the void of hologram Janeway in a way that was very strange, probably for the Prodigy crew. That we really liked the idea of Picardo's Doctor kind of coming on board and assuming he knew everything there was to know about how to inspire the young crew and be a mentor. But as we've seen, he's not necessarily great at it all the time. I think we even see in Voyager sometimes he has a little bit bigger sort of sense of his abilities with interpersonal relationships than he actually has.
He thinks he's teaching Seven a lot of things, and she's and he's terrible at it. Yeah,
but he tries and he means well, and I think sometimes even in his own journey towards something resembling humanity, I think it becomes sort of a two-way street, and we really liked that idea of bringing him on and catching a glimpse of kind of what his life looks like in the sort of post-Voyager era as a sort of openly acknowledged sentient hologram. So that was the story reason that we wanted to bring him in, was because he felt he would be a really interesting and iconic character that would bring both humor but also provide sort of a really interesting perspective of like the old Vanguard to bounce off of, especially with Admiral Janeway being busy commanding a starship. And the selfish reason is that the Doctor is one of my personal favorite characters of all time, of all of television and film. And so I knew what the character and what Picardo himself could bring to the table, as far as like finding that very narrow line that you sometimes have to walk, especially in what I call adventure storytelling, where you have to have, you know, a sense of epicness and drama, but also moments of levity and heart. And I think all of that is encapsulated in the Doctor, and especially in Picardo's performance, as you'll see.
You still have Jason Alexander's Dr. Dome, which
Yes.
now means you got two doctors. Just, it seems to me like that's such an opportunity to have those two characters on the same ship.
Yeah, you know, every starship has multiple medical officers. It's not a secret. We sometimes forget that because we zero in on our main crew. But what you will come to find out is that Dr. Noam, in fact, is trained as a ship counselor.
Oh, boy.
He doesn't seem to have the temperament for that. But,
exactly.
You try to tell him that.
A Tellarite counselor. That's interesting.
He'll tell you the hard truths, and maybe doesn't have a great bedside manner.
Ah, I see. Kind of a Dr. Phil situation.
Yeah.
Well, given your overall nerdiness, which we share, the first season, each of the two arcs had a very Aaron Waltke nerd level, super fun, deep into Star Trek lore kind of episode. So
yes.
Should we expect something fun like that in this season?
So, you know, since I kind of was bumped up to a position where I was overseeing all the scripts, I would say all the scripts now have stuff like that in them. They're not like quite to the level of just jam wall to the wall, but it's like we do some very deep and surprising cuts that all kind of hang together in a way that I'm terrifically proud of. And what you should know about Prodigy in particular by now is that if we introduce a character or a world or a place, you know, it has to serve a purpose, because we don't have the money to just do a one-off visual gag. You'll see once you watch the season, there's a lot of stuff that pulls from every single series of Star Trek, and I think most, if not all, of the movies too. And it all just kind of inhabits this space that I guess is in every single Trekkie's head, where it's like, yes, of course they all exist in the same world, and at any time you could technically have Scotty, who's teaching at Starfleet Academy right now, go call up Spock, who's also still alive, and say, hey, let's go talk to Captain Picard. Like, you know, it can happen, is my point. And I think I'm very proud of the fact that every single episode has elements to it that feel very organic to the greater Star Trek universe. There's some really bonkers places we go, I will say.
I want to ask you questions. It's nerdy and it's more about season one. So in one of I think the penultimate episode or the final episodes of the season, the fleet of Starfleet ships included multiple Sovereign class ships. And at one point you could see it said Enterprise E on one of them, and you saw it apparently destroyed. You know, as I understand it, it's because that was the model that they had, and, you know, and they didn't realize that you could read Enterprise E off the nacelle or something. But do you want to give us a story reason why that was or was not the Enterprise E in that battle?
What I can say is this: there are two Picard maneuvers. One is standing up and lifting your shirt and so that it doesn't rise up too much. But the other is engaging your warp drive in such a way, very briefly, so that it appears like your ship is in two places at once.
So are you saying within canon that the Enterprise E was present at that battle?
That wasn't my fault.
There's another character of sorts that you're introducing, which is the Voyager-A. Tell us something cool about the Voyager-A.
As you may know from the clip we released last year, it is in fact a Lamar-class science vessel. At this particular time, which is 2384, bleeding into 2385, it is the most advanced science vessel in Starfleet, and specifically designed for deep space exploration, but having learned some of the lessons from Voyager's journeys into the Delta Quadrant. As such, I'll just say that Janeway has learned the value of having heavy armor on the sides of the ships, which is why perhaps it's a little shinier and fewer porthole windows than your typical starship. It also has, let's just say it has something very much in common with the Enterprise D and the Cerritos, even if it wasn't always seen.
So we also finally get to see Chakotay not in a flashback in that trailer.
Yes.
Like we see, and people are already saying he's hot. Cartoon Chakotay. But is he very prominent this season? Will we get a lot of him?
What I can say is this, Janeway's mission is to find Chakotay, and I think it would be pretty deeply disappointing for her to just fail completely.
Right.
So I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Chakotay does show up, and as I've said before, when we introduce a character, it's not purely as a MacGuffin or as an eye-popping thing. I think there's going to be a significant growth for both the character of Chakotay and our young Prodigy crew as they kind of find this erstwhile captain and bring him home.
But in the end, this show is about the kids and their growth, and they're now what's the technical term? They were trainee, or they were
warrant? Aren't they warrant officers or something?
They're warrant officers in training, so technically they are trainees.
Right.
They're not in the academy technically, because that was the big thing. They couldn't be at the end. Yeah.
No, but they are all trainees. And we have seen non NCOs before in Star Trek. They're not everywhere, but there's been a few very prominent moments. I think the drumhead features someone talking about how they were so eager to serve on a Starfleet ship that they didn't go to the academy and found a way through the NCO program. It's essentially a chance for characters that are not officers, and sometimes they're straight up civilians, to still be able to work on a starship. And even that goes all the way back to TOS, where you have like Yeoman, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. They're not necessarily officers, but they serve a purpose on the ship.
Yeah, we saw a lot of like crewmen in jumpsuits and things like that who were sort of separate. I mean, which is, I think, good for kids now, because I think there is maybe a lot of kids now saying, I don't mean little kids, but that college isn't necessarily the only path.
Yes.
And so I feel like it's kind of saying that, which is really valuable.
Yeah.
It kind of, at least certainly the last part of the season one, set up that their goal is to join Starfleet and become Academy cadets. Is that their goal in life, at least to start season 2?
So I think at this point their goal is they are hoping to serve in Starfleet. And I think at least some of them, especially Rock, is hanging on to the hope that they can work, that they can eventually join Starfleet Academy and become officers in the traditional sense. But we wanted to just kind of leave the door open that this is effectively like a glorified internship, which again, we didn't make that up. There are in fact internships in Star Trek. I think there in TNG, there are people on board the Enterprise D that were there on internships.
Olivia Dabo, right?
Thank you. You are correct that the goal of our Prodigy crew is very much like we'd like to serve in Starfleet in some capacity, and I think Rock especially is laser focused on getting doing this internship to build up their resume enough to finally qualify for Starfleet Academy and do the whole track, get her doctorate and postdoc. But that's not necessarily for everybody, as you'll see.
You didn't know the fate of the show when you were writing this season. How you wrap it up? Like, did you think we need to wrap this up so that it can just wrap up, or are we, because season 1 ended very much towards looking to season 2. I don't know if you guys knew or you had a quiet green light, but it certainly felt like you were setting up a second season.
We were, perhaps out of confidence or hubris. we knew that season 1 would probably result in a season 2, and everyone was on board with that. Season 2, not even necessarily about not being certain if there were more episodes or not, but it was more just from a narrative standpoint. There are certain thresholds you want the characters to cross when they reach that organic point. And we didn't want to belabor the narrative threads that we set up in episode 3, 4, 5 beyond episode 40. Instead, we wanted to satisfyingly conclude a lot of that stuff while setting up an open window for new adventures in a way that we felt very organic and exciting.
Which is why the Hagemans, and I believe you have said, if this does well on Netflix, if people watch it, which they should repeatedly, starting July 1st, and even now, that there could be a season 3. It's all up to Netflix and how the show does, right?
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, like what can fans do? Just watch as much as possible? Is that?
I think watch and rewatch in the first, especially when it first comes out in the first month, is great. Spread the word, tell people, because there are kind of two modes, I guess, of a successful TV show. One is appointment viewing, right? That's shows that are already massively popular. That's your Game of Thrones or your Lost or whatever, where you watch it simply because everyone else is and you don't want to be left behind at the water cooler. But there's another type of television viewing that can be successful, which is very much like a snowball effect and a word of mouth. And it all kind of feeds in on itself in like a feedback loop, where the more you spread the word and the more you talk about the season once it's out and you say, hey, have you seen this season yet? It's really great. All of that kind of builds into something that keeps it trending on the charts. It keeps it recommending to other people. And that, I think, is something that feels apropos for our little starship that could. So, it's happened numerous times. There are shows that dropped all at once that initially kind of did well and then became huge. Like, for instance, Fallout, I think they dropped all 10 episodes at once. And then, several weeks later, it was revealed it grew to become the number 1 show on Amazon. That's certainly possible. Blue Eye Samurai is another great example of, like, by word of mouth, it just started trending and growing until it became a massive hit on Netflix. So, it may sound tried and true, but watch the show, rewatch it, and, tell people that they should check it out, spread fan art, do everything. It's just enjoy it. Because that's what it's for.
And watch the spoilers, because that's the tricky part, is everybody's at a different place as they're watching.
Yeah. Somebody said they were going to start adding hashtag Prodigy spoilers. And I fully endorse that hashtag. Yeah. So that way you can mute that. And if you don't want to see any spoilers, so everybody just use hashtag Prodigy spoilers in your posts.
But only when you are doing a spoiler, because,
yes.
Right. If you're just saying the show's great, you can just say the show's great.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Fallout, and it's been a couple of years since you wrapped up writing. How easy or hard will it be to get the band back together again? Get Ella back, get all the writers back, get you back, get the Hagemans, all of it.
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance of when and if and how. Obviously Ella Purnell is amazing, and she's become very busy lately, which is great. But she loves the show, and I think she has her contract with us and everything. I'm sure that she'd be willing to do it if the opportunity arose. But that's the question that all TV shows face. Even Mike McMahon has talked about on Lower Decks, between seasons. Sometimes people would move on to brighter things, and so they'd bring in fresh blood. But that's honestly a good thing for any show, to kind of keep it fresh and original. And it really just depends on what happens when.
why don't you tell us, like, are you working on any other project that you can talk about?
Not that I can talk about, no. That's the unfortunate thing about NDAs, and especially, in today's day and age where television takes a long time to make.
But you are working. You are
writing. I am working. Yes, I'm not busking or anything like that. I'm not offering Trek trivia facts on the side of the road.
You are writing cool updates on Substack, keeping people up on your projects.
Yeah, if people want to kind of follow my work, and occasionally I'll have things to say about the craft of screenwriting or fun stuff I'm working on that's come out. There's a short that recently premiered at the Los Angeles International Latino Film Festival that I did with my friend Nikki Lopez, who created Santiago of the Seas for Nickelodeon. She wanted to do something skewing a little bit older and sort of, Ghostbustery, that sort of thing. And that just came out. I don't think you can watch it online yet, but we're working on like that. But people seem to really love it. So I'll share things like that on my Substack.
We'll put a link to it on the site.
You mentioned shorts, and it made me think of Very Short Treks, which
you
wrote what most people consider the best of those.
Which some people consider the only good one, just saying.
So have you heard from Casper or from CBS? Was that a one-off, or is there any chance for more? I know that there are more ideas, apparently.
Yes, I think, there was definitely some ideas that were on the cutting room floor. But I think Casper would love to do more if he could, but that's so outside of my pay grade. I was a hired gun and said, "Do you want to make a little short that's having fun with Star Trek?" And I said yes.
You didn't even have to finish that sentence, I'm sure. Anything else before you go? About anything you want to talk about? Star Trek, not Star Trek?
I guess I'll just say it one more time. If you're excited about Star Trek and you're sad that Lower Decks is not going to be coming out till the, many months from now, you have 20 new episodes of Star Trek that are going to be waiting for you right on Netflix coming July 1st. And if you want more updates, feel free to follow the Star Trek Prodigy Writers Room Twitter or X handle. It's at Trek Prodigy Room. They're pretty good about, retweeting fan art and updating any new stuff. Also, just on the toy front, I know that Fan Home just announced that Prodigy is in fact among the shows that are getting some cool new stuff that you can buy from them. I don't know if I'm allowed to say which ships, but they're ships that are Prodigy related. Also, I don't know if it's on the website or not, but I will in fact be at STLV this year in Las Vegas.
Great, we're going to see you there.
Well, it's always fun to have Aaron join us, and I thought that was a fun chat. He was very careful to avoid spoilers, but I think we learned a lot about season 2 and where things are going with now that we have an actual trailer.
Yeah, I think he's perfected the art of actually saying something interesting and valuable, even when he can't reveal details. Because we know some people are not good at that, and we're like, there's nothing there. But he doesn't do that. I feel like we are still learning things about the show.
I thought his comment about how, because he was kind of more in charge in season 2, he got to spread the nerdiness around a bit more. It's interesting. So, in case you haven't, check out TrekMovie.com. You could watch the trailer. You can read the stuff from the press release, the new synopsis. Again, it's July 1st on Netflix, but not everywhere. If you're in a Sky Showtime country in Europe, it's going to be on Sky Showtime, but we don't have the dates yet for that. But it'll be on Netflix everywhere else. We still don't know what's happening in Canada. I wish we had those details. Hopefully by next week's episode, we'll have those details. It was on CTV Sci-Fi. It may very well be on CTV Sci-Fi, but we just haven't confirmed that yet.
But we will keep updating the site. As soon as we have any information, we'll let you know.
They're just starting the publicity campaign. Hopefully there's a big campaign, because it's important for people to know about this show, because if it doesn't do well on Netflix, that's it, Yep. So spread the word, assuming you like it.
Which we think you will, even though we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, we've yet to, we should be getting screeners soon, hopefully.
Any second now.
Yeah, what we're thinking about doing, and the way we're probably going to review the season, as Aaron talked about, there's multiple 2-parters. We're thinking of doing 2 episodes of All Access Star Trek a week for the summer, and in each one of those episodes, we would probably review 2 episodes of Prodigy or so. So we'll probably spread it out over the summer, and shorter but more frequent episodes of All Access Star Trek with a lot of Star Trek products. It's going to be the Prodigy summer. Maybe we'll take a break for Comic-Con and for Star Trek Las Vegas, when there's other big, events. But Prodigy is going to keep us busy for a few weeks, but we're not going to spread it out over 20 weeks, because that would be crazy.
I know, although I do wish it was airing once a week and we could. It doesn't make sense when it's all dropping at once to do it that way.
Yeah. We'll probably put up a release schedule for those who want to kind of watch along with us. We're going to try to not spoil ourselves and just start watching the show couple episodes at a time.
Right. All right. Well, why don't we wrap up with our bits of the week? Tony?
Mine is a video and a Facebook group. These model makers had a contest at Wonderfest, which is a convention that happened at the beginning of the month in Louisville. And what these model makers did is they started with the Galileo shuttle model from round 2, and you had to do mashups. And so there's a video from the Adam Savage tested page, which kind of caught me onto this. And there's some wild, there's some obvious stuff. There's like Battlestar Galactica mashup, Star Wars mashups, but someone made it into the van from Dumb and Dumber. They, did a mashup of the Minnow from Gilligan's Island, the A-Team van.
Christine's going to love the Gilligan's Island one.
So check out. So in our show notes, there'll be links to the video and the Facebook page with lots of pictures of really creative stuff of these Star Trek shuttle mashups with every franchise you could imagine.
Fun. Creative.
Very.
Yeah. Mine is also a video, and it's called Deep Space Nine, actually with the number 9 versus spelling it out, but make it 30 Rock. And basically someone added 30 Rock music to a whole bunch of regular scenes from Deep Space Nine. Threw in, actually they do steal some stuff from TNG, but they incorporate the style of 30 Rock. So that then they do an open with all the characters making those faces that are so perfect. They do a cutaway of like what Kira's thinking when Jake says something to her. It's so fun and creative and clever and beautifully executed. It was made by someone named Randy Whitlock, who's a professional editor who's done teasers and commercials and stuff like that. But we'll put in a link because if you're a 30 Rock fan and a Star Trek fan, it is perfection.
Those are 2 of my favorite things. So.
Yeah, it's really great. Before we go for the week, we just wanted to give a shout out to our friend Bob Thompson, who's going through a hard time right now. Bob, we're thinking of you. And thanks for always being so complimentary about the podcast.
Also, last week we had a little giveaway of a Golden Enterprise D.
Otherwise known as the fat one.
From our friends at Master Replicas with the Lawrence Luckinbill episode. And the winner was NKC with his comment, "This pain has poisoned your soul for a long time." We'll have more giveaways. And Aaron Waltke actually randomly picked.
Yes, you were chosen by Aaron, who picked a number.
Yeah.
So congratulations and enjoy your ship.
Yeah, and there is an article on the site about, speaking of ships, it was announced this week that Fan Home is starting up a Starship Collection series in November, focusing on the new shows. Aaron mentioned it during our interview, but they will be focusing on all the new shows. There's an article on the site with some pictures, but we'll have a lot more as we get closer to launch in November for the new Starship Collection.
And we'll be back next week with a new episode.
With something. And then we start reviewing Prodigy.
Yep. All right. See you then.
Bye.